when we talk about ADHD, it doesn't shut off in the bedroom. So when you ask, like, how does it show up? In any and all ways, ADHD can show up.
All right, everyone, it is interview time, and we are here with a new guest, and we are very excited about this episode. Squirrel. April's already squirreling now. On ADHD and sex and relationships. And so this is with Leann Borneman. And Leann is a therapist and a sexologist who does a lot of work that is specifically geared towards ADHD and outside of that too. That's not all that you do, right? So you already heard a little bit about Leann in the bio, but Leann, welcome to Shameless Sex. We're so happy to have you here. And can you tell us and our listeners a little bit more about how you got to where you are today in the field of sexuality?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So for me, I've been in the field for about 6 years now, and I have my master's as a social worker. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And as I was in my undergrad, I was a rape crisis counselor, a volunteer rape crisis counselor. And I started to recognize how important our sexuality was. And specifically, it was when I was in Starbucks, and you know those long tables that they have for us to like kind of commute and work. I was reading a textbook and it was on reproduction, and I was looking at it and I just gasped out loud and was like, oh, that's what that is. And I learned something new about my anatomy, and that was it. Like, I've always been a type to be open, but it was in these moments with being a rape crisis counselor and then learning more about my anatomy at like 26 years of age. I'm like, no, like something needs to change. And so I got into the field. I've always gravitated towards having open conversations about intimacy and sex. And then when my daughter got her diagnosis through the school for ADHD, I got my diagnosis and everything clicked for me. And while everything clicked for me, I was like, but I'm still struggling in my relationship. Something's not making sense. I'm still struggling with my intimacy. And I started gravitating clients that all had ADHD, and kind of honestly, it just clicked. It all just kind of meshed together for me. And next thing I knew, I was specializing in ADHD and sexuality. I became a certified sex therapist. I'm working on my dissertation right now to become a clinical sexologist, and my research is going to be fully dedicated just to the ADHD experience around our sexuality.
All right. Well, if you need someone to help you out with your research, I'm here for you, Leann. This is so intriguing because we've never done an episode on this. I've been very public on the show about my ADHD diagnosis, and I was diagnosed back in the 80s. It was, I think they called it just, I was hyperactive. It wasn't attention deficit disorder, and it wasn't called a disorder back then. It was something different, at least. And a lot of times from what I remember from being a human, I was a girl. So girls weren't diagnosed as often as boys back in the 80s, at least in Wisconsin. I can't speak for every other state, but I know my brother was diagnosed, and then my mom thought that possibly I had something like that. And she refused to put me on medication, and she refused to put my brother on medication. And then, fast forward, I never really understood what ADHD really was. There wasn't a lot of public information about it other than people that are not focused, or they're always fiddly, or there's a spectrum of this neurospicy. I don't like disorder, always sounds like so unorderly for me, but because that, I guess, is disorder. But this episode is with an expert. It's not just me flapping on about squirreling out about something. And so I would love for you to talk about what HDA, what is ADHD? There's also, I know it was called ADD as well. And then how would someone know if they have it? Does everyone have it? Is it limited? Can you just expand on this?
Yeah, definitely. So you're talking about the change in the diagnosis from years. So it was ADD that changed in the 80s, and we switched over to ADHD because we noticed that there wasn't a lot of differences between hyperactivity and inattention in terms of like how it affects us. So when we're looking at ADHD specifically, it's really important to focus in on understanding that it's really much more about executive functionings and the deficits associated with it. So if you're somebody that's struggling with ADHD, or you think you might have ADHD, it's really important to understand what those 7 core executive functions are. And for everybody involved, it is inhibition, which is your impulse control. You then have working memory, which is both nonverbal and verbal working memory. You have motivation regulation. You have emotion regulation. You then have working memory already. And then you have planning and problem solving. So all of these things are vital for our day-to-day functioning. But with ADHD, we have deficits. And like you said, everyone's on a spectrum. So everyone can experience it differently. And this is one of the reasons why so many people get misdiagnosed, not diagnosed, because tons of people make an assumption that it's like a one fit mold, and it's not. And there's a lot of experiences that can be had. You have inattentive presentation, you have hyperactive presentation, and then you have combined. We don't generally use the word types anymore. Like, you know how people say, like, oh, you have combined type, inattentive type. And the reason being for that is because research actually found that it can actually change through a person's lifespan. So hormones are affected by this, age is affected by this, stressors are affected by this. So you can present hyperactive in one time of your life, and then like 3 months later you can be more inattentive. So it really fluctuates, and that's why we like to say presentation instead of type, because when we use the word type, it's like you're stuck with it, and that's not how we see it.
And it can also, and Amy has a question that's related to sex, but what I wanted to point out is that from what I understand is that some folks may develop like adult ADHD. It might not have presented in their youth.
Is that more common in women?
I believe so. The research has shown that. I don't know if you have more information on that, but I do want to point that out. That's from what I've learned, not from WebMD, but just, from talking to the doctors.
So when it comes to the research, there's no research that actually supports this concept of adult onset ADHD. What we see is that individuals that may have not gotten their diagnosis in childhood, it could be a couple of variables. One, they might have had a really supportive environment as a child, so their symptoms might not have been showing as dramatically as adulthood with extra stressors and responsibilities. The other thing is hormonal. Hormones change throughout our lifespan, both males and females. Obviously more on the side of the females experience. And that also can play a role as we age, things can change. But yes, we are seeing more diagnosed females in later versus earlier. And the research really points more to the stigma around like what it looks like in different sexes, and this concept and this idea that it's you're bouncing off the walls, right? Like that's not what ADHD only is.
That was what I heard so much as a child. Like, stop bouncing off the walls. I'm like,
yeah. So yes, we see a lot more people getting diagnosed, but you also have to understand, like across our time, we've also opened up more conversation. We have more access on social media. More people are understanding and reading and hearing, and they're like, oh, this is interesting. This might sound like me. And then they're going to appropriate professionals to get the diagnosis. So there's a variety of reasons why we're seeing that influx in adults getting their diagnosis, but specifically women in particular, you have to be mindful of estrogen and progesterone and how that fluctuates and changes through perimenopause and then postmenopause. And so a lot of the symptoms that can come up are very similar to the symptoms that one would have as an ADHDer. So like if a child gets a evaluation, or anybody gets an evaluation by a neuropsychologist, one of the questions they'll ask specifically females is, were these symptoms present prior to puberty? And the reason being for that is because those hormones can actually create very similar symptoms as ADHD, if not identical sometimes.
Interesting. I mean, I've known April for almost 20 years, and we were not always working together, more like in our friendship space. And so we've watched each other, change, shift, and grow. And then decided to grow a big business called Shameless Sex and write a book for 2 years. And, all these parts so in the last couple of years, April's like left and right, like my ADHD is showing. And then I remember like seeing this, happening later or not happening later, but like presenting, I guess is the word you use, or being diagnosed later in life. This wasn't one of our questions. We'll get into the sex part. What is the current research showing on it being, genetic, or being something that is nature versus nurture? I remember, was it Gabor Mate? And I'm not saying his name right, but Gabor Mate in the realm of Hungry Ghosts, or I think, and he does a lot of other stuff in this world, was talking about how it can be something that comes from childhood trauma and not something that is genetic. Like where are we at right now with that?
So Dr. Mate and his whole platform is a theory. It is not, no, there's no research that supports his claim. One day, maybe there will be, but as of now, there's absolutely no research that says social trauma causes ADHD. So we have tons and tons and tons of research showing and validating that ADHD is heavily genetic, hereditary. So about like 70 to 73% on the heredity side. And then you have environmental trauma that can, yes, cause ADHD. So environmental trauma is talking about like traumatic brain injury, low birth weight when you're born, maybe alcohol use and alcohol consumption while in utero. Those are called environmental traumas. Social traumas have not been proven. And we disproved this about 45 years ago when everyone wanted to try to blame parents for the cause of autism. So his theory can be kind of dangerous because there is absolutely no research that supports it as of now, and it's just a theory. So when we're just looking at the research, it is heavily hereditary, but we do know that there are environmental traumas that can cause ADHD as well.
If you hung out with me, my dad, and my brother, you all would go crazy. It's like three nutters bouncing off walls like the whole time. It's just like blah, blah, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. It's wild. It's like no one can sit still. So I do believe in the heredity.
That's a hard one.
That is heredity. Help me out.
Hereditary.
Hereditary. That's not her ADHD, everyone.
No.
She's just tired. It's a long day.
Hereditary nature.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, because for me, I have a lot of therapists, and one of them keeps talking to me, and I'm like, are you thinking I'm April? Keeps saying something. Well, because you have ADHD. And I'm like, wait. I've never been diagnosed, and he's worked with April before, so that's why.
Oh shit!
But he's done a couple. So I'm like, I've never actually been diagnosed with this, but now I'm really curious. And my dad wasn't diagnosed, but I mean, Russell.
You're so grounding for me, so that's scary.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, but this isn't about me. No, don't worry, Chip. I'm still here. Let's bring this to the sex part. All the listeners are like, yeah, you do have ADHD, Amy. Come on. So how does ADHD show up in sex and relationships? And curious about like the struggles and challenges, but also maybe there's some superpowers?
Okay, so when we talk about ADHD, it doesn't shut off in the bedroom. So when you ask, like, how does it show up? In any and all ways, ADHD can show up. And I think one of the most important things to just note really right off the bat is that ADHD does not cause any sexual dysfunction. ADHD does not cause any issues in relationships. ADHD just makes things harder than when compared to somebody else. So what I'm trying to get at is everybody can experience any of these experiences, but because of ADHD, we have higher levels of those experiences or chances of those experiences when compared to somebody without ADHD. So when it comes to the bedroom, one of the first things I work with clients about is this concept that sex is a task. Okay. Like when you really look at sex, like you have to give your energy, your attention, your focus, you're switching things up. You're trying to maybe play around. We as ADHDers struggle with task initiation. So if we're also not enjoying the sex and the intimacy, that's obviously going to cause a big disconnect for us. But sensory also can come in. Now, not everyone with ADHD experiences sensory challenges, but every client that I've worked with thus far has, and I personally have sensory issues as well. Those things can come into the mix. If you're understimulated, overstimulated, thinking about your five senses, how those things show up in the bedroom, something most people don't even think of, but lubrications and natural lubrication can be a sensory issue for a lot of people, causing just a disconnect, and then you don't want to show up, and that can lead to possible low desire. Hyperfixations on your insecurities. So like everyone has insecurities, right? But an ADHDer, we are more prone to hyperfixate on our thoughts. And that can lead to further disconnect. So when you ask, like, how does it show up? I mean, it can show up in every way you could possibly think ADHD shows up outside of the bedroom. And when I'm working with my clients, there are similarities of what's showing up for them. But quite honestly, it's very a la carte. Like my clients come in, we talk about how their ADHD is showing up, and we look at it and we figure out how is that showing up in the bedroom, and then helping them set the environment and the sex and the relationship up for success.
I think that this is a great, not only a topic, but a great time to say that for me, ADHD has never been a problem in the bedroom. It's the ADHD medication that makes me have issues in the bedroom. It makes that for me. That's a reason that I've preferred to wean myself off when I feel like I can, because I feel like it has had this property which makes me disconnected from my body, right? Because I'm so heady as it is. And then when I'm on medication, I feel like I can't focus my energy where I typically can when I'm not, because I'm not as sensory. And I don't know if that is your experience. I know everyone is different. So I can't say that this would be a cut and paste mold, but I know for me, if I'm off of my medication, that I have a lot more in tuneness. Like I can fine tune my bedroom experiences. Have you had any other patients, clients, people that you've interacted with have had that experience with their medication? Or is it just me? Am I just weird?
No, you're not alone at all by any means. So medication management is a real personal choice. I have tons of clients that are not on medication, and then I have clients that are. There's a variety of reasons for why it happens, but some people just don't jive chemically with their medication, specifically in the bedroom. And you're not alone in that. So I have a lot of clients that come to me not because they technically have issues in the bedroom, but because they want to explore kink and BDSM and other ways to enhance their sensory experiences, to give that novelty, that more stimulation than they're getting just from the sex and the intimacy that they're currently having. So you are talking spot on with, again, everyone is on a spectrum, but by no means are you alone at all on that.
Thank you, Leann.
You're welcome.
And I have a question. I remember just before the question, I just recently received my sex ed certification from SHA, the Sexual Health Alliance. And one of the things we were talking about was obviously not only orientation, but people, obviously sexual orientation is also a spectrum, but the majority of folks that identify as pansexual or that identify as demisexual or that have a wider spectrum of sexual orientation tend to be neurodivergent. There's like an actual study that I was really obsessed with. I was like, this is so cool. And I was trying to, the research papers while I was talking to you, because I'm ADHD, I was like, I want to reference it, and I'll have to look back at the papers. But it is true because I think maybe not only ADHD folks, but people that are neurodivergent have this wider range of, I think, maybe curiosities. I think their brains maybe aren't just like focused in one area clearly, but on the vastness of what is and what could be and what
this
might
is why
be.
I chose you as a business partner. Just kidding. That's not why. I was like, I will benefit from this.
But it was like, I think it was, I want to say, and fuck me if I'm wrong, but 75% of like folks that like are neurodivergent on the spectrum, not just ADHD, but obviously, again, the spectrum, they do not identify as heterosexual. They identify as something else on the sexuality spectrum when it comes to identification. I thought that was really cool.
No, it is.
Yeah.
And you're talking also about research. So the reason I went into the topic that I'm looking for in my dissertation is because right now we have very little research around neurodivergent experiences within sexuality. We have a lot more research on autism, especially when we're talking about BDSM and kink. As of today, there is literally no research on ADHD and BDSM/kink. And that is what I'm doing, because it makes sense when you look at how kink is just in general. It's structured. You have constant communication. You don't have to worry about social cues. You're being mindful of your sensory. And we see in the research and the literature that there is currently available is that there are more individuals who have autism engaging in BDSM and kink than the general population.
Wow.
I like that. I like that.
Someone recently told me that the word spectrum is not being used for neurodivergent. Or actually, no, they said spectrum has been out for a while, and even neurodivergence out, and now it's just I mean, is spectrum not something that people are enjoying using to describe themselves or being classified as on the spectrum? I
don't work with any clients currently that have autism. I only specifically work with ADHD. However, I have a few friends that are diagnosed with autism, and I've never heard of any issues, but it really is up to the individual. I know that there's a lot of change in the verbiage that we're using today, and there's a lot of fluidity with it and constant change. But in regards to, is it right? Is it okay? I wouldn't know. And generally, I just always leave it up to the person. Like, hey, how do you want me to, identify, what and how should I express this? Just to always be mindful of that.
I don't like the fact that it's called a disorder. I think that irritates me personally. If someone's like, you're ADD as fuck or ADHD as fuck, I'm like, yeah, but I don't think I'm disordered. I think I'm as ordered as I can be.
I think she's
And it's
interesting.
interesting. And you know what you're talking about is a preference, right? Because like for you, you don't like that, but I actually like to call it what it is, which is a disability, because there are barriers, right? And I feel like when we minimize what it truly is, we're not allowing us to take it seriously. Therefore, we're not allowing ourselves to create the resources and the support. And I don't know if anyone else notices this, but like when we see ADHD just in general on social media, I feel like it's always the same shit.
Mhm.
Always the same jokes, always the same concepts. There's no real constructive, like, well, what do you fucking do about it kind of mentality. It's just very like constant and the same. And it's like, it's not a joke, but I feel like people joke about it. And granted, you can turn your deficits into amazing things, right? Like my hyperfixation is what's allowing me to thrive in my practice. I feel like it's badass, but I also know that sometimes my hyperfixation causes me significant distress, and again, some people like to call it a superpower, some people don't. It's a preference. So girl, if you like to call it not a disorder, you do you, right? Like, and that's what anybody.
So
I think a
change the
superpower.
different S at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
ADHS.
ADHD, my attention deficit superpower.
My
hyperactive
you give her that
superpower.
one too. So.
Except when you come to my house, all my cabinets will be open and I'll be like in 15 projects and have 75 emails open.
At one time, I just had to run an errand from my own house to go somewhere and left you there, and I came back and all my books were organized in a different way than I prefer.
They were in a rainbow, and she's like, I had those alphabetized in categories, like, but don't they look much more pretty?
It's like, I'm glad you were continued to work when I left.
She was gone for 20 minutes. I was like, sorry.
That's the restlessness right there.
Yes. Yeah.
Story of my existence. Okay. Moving on.
Well, so I think this will connect to what you just said, or we're speaking to with so many parts. But how do you, as a therapist and sexologist, help people with ADHD become more sexually empowered? Like, what does that look like when people are working with you on this?
Yeah, awesome question. So a lot of people that come to me are confused, they feel disconnected. And the first step is self-compassion, figuring out what your ADHD looks like, education, and then it's all about setting the environment up for success. And the reason being for that is that we have deficits. We're not changing those deficits, right? So our environment has to be set up for our success. So for instance, just an example, if sensory is the issue, well, we need to scan the room. Like, what does sex look like? And my clients get very uncomfortable with this question because I always say, like, I'm a fly on the wall. Like, you need to tell me every single little piece of information for me to really understand it. We unpack what it looks like. How are those sensory pieces coming up? And then we fix them. We take them away. We add something. So a perfect example for me personally, I can't stand silence. Silence is so overstimulating for me. And it took me a while to figure out that's why I was avoiding sex. And that's why I was struggling in sex. I thought it was like my insecurities at one point. And then I started to pick up the pieces of like, oh shit, when there's music playing in the background, I feel a little less overwhelmed, overstimulated. And then for me, it was creating a playlist, but then I had to figure out music that wouldn't distract me. I had to make a playlist that really was allowing me to zone in and enjoy myself. So my goal and my work that I do with my clients is, how is your ADHD showing up, outlining it, listing it, and then figuring out how do we set the environment up for success. It's ramps. So when you think of somebody in a wheelchair, a person in a wheelchair can do anything and everything for the most part, as long as there's resources in their environment for them to be able to do it. The barriers is what are the issues, right? So if there's not a ramp to get into a building, it's going to be very hard for someone who can't walk to get in that building. It's the same thing for us ADHDers. If our environment isn't set up with those ramps for us to gain access, we're going to struggle to connect with them. So I help my clients find those ramps, create them, place them, and execute them.
Wow. I like considering them ramps or roads or just the pathways to how you can be successful in the bedroom or in life, because life is complex. And I can tell you what, you can never get what you want. You live in New York, right? You said, I don't know if you live in the city. I live in Santa Cruz, and I feel like silence is my virtue, because I feel like I'm constantly living in noise, and my partner loves fucking sports ball, and I love sports ball too. I try to work in my office, and because the proximity, I always feel like there's just noise. And so when he's gone, I like turn off everything, but then there'll be like construction and I'm like, oh, I'm like, I can't ever get silent. And the invention of noise canceling headphones has been life changing. But I also feel like it's been a bit of a fuck all for people around me because I'm so immersed in whatever I'm doing, or the music I'm listening to, or the podcast I'm listening to, or the audible book I'm listening to, or the person I'm talking to, that anything around me is shut off. And I'm like, this is bliss. But sorry for everyone else around me, because I'm probably either singing super loud, dancing in the street, or talking probably way higher at a higher level than I should be, but it has been really effective for me. I'm like, this is awesome. Thank God there's no more like, what are those, the Walkman, whether the shitty headphones?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have the same headphones as you that I use, the Apple, the Pro Max headphones.
I hate them.
I don't like those as much either, but they're better because they have the soft top. So there's all sorts of things. I use those when I do my meditations and I love them. So that was just an observation, because you like noise or sound and I like silence, and you can never get silence.
Wait, it's just a question about the sound thing. Is that because you said having music that you can really relate to helps you to like relax a little more, so then, and because it gets rid of that silence, because the insecurities come up. Do you feel those insecurities when you're alone? Like, you don't need to tell me about your masturbation practice, but is that specifically related to like being around other people, or is it just within yourself, even the silence is hard?
So for that example I gave, I thought my disconnect in the moment was because of my insecurities, until I was able to pinpoint that it was a sensory issue due to silence.
Okay.
So for me, it wasn't insecurity. I thought it was, because that's how easy our ADHD can show up when we're not thinking about it. I mean, when you really think about it, we live in a neurotypical world. So growing up, we have tons of neurotypical expectations placed on us in our relationships and our intimacy, how we're showing up in the bedroom. So those are our scripts. Those are our narratives that we hold on to. So when we're trying to engage, we're not thinking about how our ADHD is showing up. And some people don't even know they have ADHD. So they go to and gravitate towards typical reasons as to why you'd be disconnected, like I was guilty of. I went straight to my insecurities, thinking maybe that's what it is. You know, I don't want to be naked, or I feel dirty. You know, I'm big on sensory. Like, I have to shower before I have sex, or it's not happening. And then I have to have the energy to shower. So my husband loves me because he understands it's a clusterfuck to get me in the bedroom. Total clusterfuck.
Oh, I love your husband for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
How liberating is that, though, to like know that about yourself,
Yeah.
and also having a partner that can like see that and support you in that. Remember April, a couple of years ago, when I went on a date in Oregon, and yes, you remember the story. So I went on a date with someone, smoking hot, babe, from a dating app, and sat down with him
Chef.
Yes.
Oh, got it.
Yes.
Okay,
Sat down with him, and yes, the hot chef. And we're talking, and we're in a bar, and he's talking to me, but like talking a lot and a lot more than, and then keeps was looking somewhere else most of the time. And I keep seeing his like head move, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And I hang in there for like a half an hour, and I'm like, is he just like not into me, or like
no eye contact?
nervous? What's going on? Like looking at all these other people walking in. So I'm like, hey, so I think I'm going to call it already on the date. He's like, wait, what? And I was like, well, yeah, I think you're really attractive, but like, I don't really know what's going on here. Doesn't seem like you're like, I think we're just really different in the way that we relate. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, you have the wrong impression. I have ADHD. And if you give me another chance and we go outside and we're sitting in a way where there's a wall behind me and not other people moving behind me, then he's like, then I can focus. And so we went out there and had that set up. And all of a sudden he was like very present, very focused. And this could lead to the kink part, but needless to say that when we went back to his apartment, he brought in that hyper focus, that part of himself, to sex, and it was awesome. it made him an amazing lover because he's so focused on me. He was also a major giver and a kinky person. So that was really interesting.
That's cool. And I think what you're saying, is that there's so many different aspects from what I'm receiving. So every person, if you can tap into living in this world that is, what'd you say?
Neurotypical.
Neurotypical. I was like normal typical, which is double typical. Typical squared.
I love how you talk.
So it's like you have to discover yourself. You have to do your own research to figure out. And people and using ADHD is not a negative thing. That's what I've realized and that's why being public about being ADHD, and there's no shame in having ADHD, whether it's out in the world, in the bedroom, and then coming to the fact of, I love this story. And I remember you saying that to me and you're like, he reminded me of you. I was like, I look you in the eyes when we're talking at restaurants. I try.
Yeah, it's different. It was more like that. The energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
But see, he set the environment up for success for the second half of that date. And so with my clients, what I urge them to do and what I do in all of my settings is I let people know straight on, like, listen, if I'm not looking at you, it's because I actually concentrate better when I'm looking afar. That's my ADHD, not disrespecting you, because that is considered rude, right? Neurotypical. You look people in the eye when you're talking to them. You're not looking in the corner. But he knew he had ADHD and he knew right off the bat, oh shit, yeah, well, if we do this, it's better for me. And the second his environment supported his deficits, everything was golden.
Yeah.
I love that about the chef. Thank you, hot chef.
Thanks, hot chef.
Thanks, hot chef.
Yeah. Thank you. That should be a new show. Hey, hot chef.
Yeah, hot chef.
Like Love on the Spectrum. Everyone tells me I need to watch it, and I need to watch it because I've heard that so many good things are like received from it. And I don't know. I'm glad that there's more research, more people like you. But let's talk about this research, because you mentioned that there isn't a lot of research out there about ADHD and sex. So why is that?
So when I say that there isn't a lot of research out there, it's very repetitive in the sense of seeing correlations, so relationships between ADHD and hypersexuality, ADHD and porn use, ADHD and divorces, ADHD and horrible conflict resolution. When you look at the data and the research, it is so depressing. Because it's like painting this picture as ADHD causes all these things. And while the research does not directly say that, I must add that it really is the vibe that it gives off, because it's just constantly showing all the negative shit that we experience. Like, where the hell is the positive things? Where are the suggestions? How do we maximize it? Because as I'm reading all this research, collecting for my dissertation, I'm reading it and I'm saying, okay, this can happen to anybody. This can happen to anybody. But because ADHD has deficits, it just happens a little bit harder for us. But the biggest problem is that there's no research that talks about, well, how do we change this? What's going on environmentally, maybe, right? Like, are there expectations being placed in the relationship in the bedroom that's not realistic for somebody with ADHD? Does the person even know what their ADHD really looks like that are being used in this research? So when I say there isn't research, there's very limited research. And especially when it comes to kink and BDSM, there's nothing. Like, I literally have not found one article that is designated to BDSM and kink engagement as an ADHD. Nothing. So the only research I can find is the research that's associated with children, developmental, the symptoms, symptomology, etc. But when we focus on sexuality, it's really outlining all the shit that we're failing in.
So speaking of like the research part, though, so you are working on your dissertation where you're looking at the correlation between BDSM, kink, and ADHD, and you shared a little bit about that earlier. But can you elaborate a little more on that, like what you're seeing, what you're learning from that?
So yeah, one of the reasons I picked the topic was because I started noticing a lot with my clients that I see. So a lot of my clients who have ADHD are also very much interested in kink and BDSM, that the scene creation around BDSM creates such a wonderful supportive environment for them. When my clients come to me and they're struggling, we explore other sensory experiences that are in line with possible kink engagement. And so I started thinking to myself, holy shit, I'm noticing a pattern here. And then I started looking into it in my own personal life. I started looking into sensory experiences. And I know this sounds like the stupidest thing in the world, but my 3.5-year-old, we were on the couch and he scratched my arm. And generally speaking, like most people would go, ooh, ow. And I'm like, shit, that kind of felt good. What is going on here? So I spoke to my husband about it, and I was like, I kind of think I want to start exploring sensory in the bedroom. I think this might be interesting. And the engagement has been wonderful for me also personally. I'm still learning about it for my own personal life. But when I started seeing the pattern, I'm like, something has to be going on here. Someone else must have come across this. And that's when I started looking in the literature, and we see it for individuals with autism, but no one's talking about ADHD. So that's how I got here.
Yeah.
Good job,
so
Leann.
Doing that.
I love that. I know. So obviously you said, so you're doing your dissertation now, you're in the midst of it. And I know that you're a sexologist, you're a certified sex therapist. So give us a little bit of a rundown how people can find you, work with you, what's to come, because I don't want to abruptly end, but I know that you have a lot going on. And I was looking at some of you have a lot of accreditation. You're phenomenal. You have so much there. You're like a firecracker. I love it.
Hey now. So people can find me on both psychologytoday.com. They can find me on my website. My website's a little bit more personal. It's my own format. You can find me on social media, Borneman Psychotherapy. My website is bornemancoaching.com. All of my information's on my website. I am an open book. My email's there. People can reach out to me either on email or Instagram. I tell people to try to reach out to me on email because Instagram is kind of wonky. I get messages and I don't even know they're there.
Yeah,
and then I feel so bad. And if you have ADHD, you're probably thinking like RSD sets in, your rejection sensitivity is going off. I'm not ignoring you, I promise. So email.
I get that every day, rejection sensitivity. That's why I don't look at Instagram. It drives me crazy. I'm
just put a post on my Instagram talking about how and why content creation is sucking my soul dry as an ADHDer. And one of the things is the RSD, right? Like you put all of your sweat and tears into it, and then the engagement numbers aren't there. And so then you start to feel rejected and it starts to fuck with you.
I understand April more now.
1,000,000%. And this is like, it's like soul sucking. Like I will cry in my room at night. Like I'm not good enough.
I have to read the reviews so
like,
often for her.
More active. I message you. I'm like, just text me. If you have my fucking phone number, text me because I'll respond there most of the time.
Yeah.
Oh, that made me feel better.
Yeah.
Not that this is about me, but God, it's been hard.
This is about everyone, April. And
it is. It's not about me.
And this is just such important information for people to have. And I know it will continue to change and shift and grow. And especially because of the work that you're doing.
How can it be a part of your study or maybe anonymously?
So I will have links. So I will send them out to you if you want to do it. It's going to be a link where you're going to take a test. It's going to be an attention test. And then you are prompted over to a survey. And that survey collects a little extra data. And this is the first of many researches to come that's going to really amp up the more positive insights and experiences for us as ADHDers. And that's my goal. And also to write a book, because I can't find a single book that I've picked up and read that I'm like, finally, someone gets me. Yeah. I usually pick up books and feel like, okay.
If people out there listening, because I know that we have a lot of folks that have ADHD that have come to me while we've been at events. They're like, hey, thank you for talking publicly about your ADHD. I have the same thing. If they want to be a part of your study as well, could they too?
100%. Yeah. I could always share the link with you as well if you ever wanted to advertise it on your page. The more people that participate makes the research even better.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. The more, the merrier. And I know that it will be, obviously, like all research, you will remain anonymous. You know that I will probably
100%.
be a part of it. So I'm not anonymous. However, folks out there listening, why not collect information, collect the data? I think that's the way to get more information that can be helpful to help people that are in a state of not understanding their sexuality, not understanding where they're at as a human. Am I alone? Right?
100%. Yeah. And those expectations that tons of us have grown up with, we bring them into our relationships and our sex and our intimacy. And some of them are okay, but most of them are very unrealistic. So the clients that I work with and the couples that I work with, again, it's about what are your expectations? Are they realistic? What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that maybe we have to throw out the window? Because if your expectations aren't realistic, you're setting yourself up for failure. And then we really have to look at the relationship and figure out, like, what can we be okay with? Because I've actually had clients that come to me and they're not okay with their partner having ADHD because it is too much for them. And, that's a choice on them. but it creates a space of understanding, okay, what are your non-negotiables? What can you be okay with or not? It's the same thing in the bedroom. Like, you really have to have uncomfortable conversations and, really ask, what are you okay with? What are you not okay with?
I love this. And when is your dissertation going to be finished? Just in case, because this episode is airing in November 2024.
Fingers crossed in June of
June 2025, everyone. So
yes.
the link, we'll share the link. I'm going to participate in this study because I think it's really important. If y'all are vibing with being part of a research study that is pretty much only going to be Leann is the birthing this idea. Leann is the first, hopefully, of many. And thank you for sharing this. This was so great, not only for me selfishly, I think for everyone listening that maybe either is married or partnered or has a child or has had an experience with folks that have ADHD, whether it's in the bedroom or clearly not in the bedroom. I think that this is going to shine a lot of light on those experiences. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts, your research, and your wisdom with us. Thank you, Leann.
I appreciate you having me because I just want to talk about it and empower as many people as I can. I didn't have it growing up, and my clients still struggle with it, and we deserve our happiness. We don't deserve research to tell us that we're just failures or that we're sucking. We are people just like anybody else. It's just finding the right fit, like clothes, like shoes, like what is our right fit, and do we like what we see?
Yeah. Well, the studies are very, also, I looked it up on my Perplexity app, and there's only about 13% of the population that is diagnosed. And it's becoming with ADHD in the United States. So
50% is pretty significant. So
yeah, it's more in boys. There's 10% of children, and I'm loving this Perplexity app. I'm not sponsored by them yet, but I love them. It's free. But it's like so in the United States, ADHD affects about 10.2% of children, and then in adults, it's about 4.4% men and 3.2% women. But there's only about 13% total of the population over the age of 18.
Do you think the people that created Perplexity have ADHD?
I'm pretty sure it's just AI, and then they compile the information from whatever studies. But it is pretty relevant. So that being said, we are rare, and rare is a gem, and gems are treasures, and treasures be told. Shameless Sex listeners, you're a treasure to all of us here, and we love you. Leann, you're an absolute boss. Thank you for being here with us. We love all of our listeners. Rate us on your favorite app that you listen to us to. And if you watch us on YouTube, sometimes we get pulled off. We have one more strike, but we are not going anywhere because we love being out there on video. And if you just listen to us in your ears, that's cool too, because we're not going anywhere there, right? We'll always be between your ears.
Always in between your ears.
In between your ears, in your brain.
Yes, always
so
in there. Yeah.
So
in your ear holes.
In your big giant ear holes.
Sometimes small and
sometimes
juicy.
Small and juicy.
Get
I don't want my ear
lube.
holes to be juicy.
Yeah, get the lube.
I don't want my ear holes juicy. That might mean I have some sort of issue. So that being said, we will see you next Tuesday for another episode of Shameless Sex. Squirreling out. Ciao for now. Squirrel, Amy. Squirrel.